Okay, so a big request that I get is how to read a crochet pattern. So I made a presentation because I couldn't figure out how to make it. So I made this. How to Read a Crochet Pattern by Sophia Bailey, also known as Sophosaurus. So I'm going to divide this into many parts because I want to make it as digestible as possible, and then I want to make the videos at less than a minute. But this is what we're going to cover. It's the skill levels, the terms, the differences, permissions, what do they mean? Abbreviations, what are common abbreviations? Stitch guide, what's a stitch guide? Materials, what are the different things you can need? Size charts, how do I use those? What is gauge? I already made videos on gauge. Pattern notes, what do those mean? Instructions, those are going to be short. And then diagrams, the different diagrams. And blocking, care instructions, and adjusting the pattern. So if you want to learn how to read a crochet pattern, be sure to like and follow because it's about to go down. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern by Sophia Bailey, also known as Sophosaurus. So let's start with the beginner skill level. I'm not going to read this to you because you can just screenshot it for yourself. So these stitches are the only stitches that are considered beginner stitches. Everything beyond it is considered easy. So you're working in rows, project or square, rectangular coasters, washcloth scarves, pot holders. Everything beyond that is no longer beginner. And I had a really hard time finding projects on Pinterest, so I went ahead and made a Pinterest board. If you go to, where you can go to other things, you can follow that Pinterest board. I'm going to make sure it has beginner level projects that are for first time crocheters. Because that's what it's supposed to be, but apparently everybody thinks that easy projects are beginner projects, and they're not. I have no idea why I'm so excited about this series, but be sure to like and follow because I'm going to keep posting videos just like this. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I show you how to read a crochet pattern. So for this one, we're going to talk about the easy skill level. Again, I'm not going to read it to you. You can screenshot it if you want it. But you know the 4 basic beginner stitches that we just went over. You know how to do front loop and back loop and post stitches, a basic granny square. And then the cluster stitches include everything from a popcorn to a puff. And any step that you take after the 4 beginner stitches is considered an easy stitch. For example, the puff stitch is 1 step after the beginner stitches, so it's an easy stitch. The jasmine stitch is 2 steps, so that one would be considered an intermediate stitch. This list is not all-inclusive. The projects are not all-inclusive. If you want to see more, I did make a Pinterest board called Easy Crochet Patterns. But most crocheters are in this category, so I don't really know what else to say about it. Like and follow for more. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I go over the different parts of a crochet pattern in less than a minute. Okay, so for this one, we're talking about the intermediate skill level. I'm not going to read it, but this is your basic lace, clothing, flowers, mandala, I don't know how to pronounce it in English, thread work, and amigurumi. Keyword is basic, so in the way that I understand basic is you're using medium weight yarn. The color changes for like a mandala, is that how you say it, are not too crazy. You can do basic like applique flowers. You can do basic clothing like just plain sweaters or like the really simple cardigans. Thread work, it's nothing too intricate. And then amigurumi is just like the assembly is minimal. Again, I did make a Pinterest board on these, so you can go check that out. And be sure to like and follow. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I show you the different parts of a crochet pattern in less than a minute. Okay, so this time we're talking about the experience skill level. Okay, so the main thing you're looking for is the yarn weight and the size of the hook. Advanced crochet techniques usually require tiny yarn and tiny hooks. The color changes and the stitch changes are irregular, meaning you have to actually pay attention to what you're doing. You can't watch TV while you're doing that. That's a pretty good indicator that it's advanced. This list is not all-inclusive. You can be experienced in 1 or 2 things and be completely inexperienced in another. That still makes you an experienced crocheter. In terms of amigurumi, most people that crochet amigurumi nowadays would be considered experienced. Basic amigurumi is something where you just make a body and the limbs. Advanced amigurumi is when you're adding spikes and unicorn horns and all that fancy stuff. And of course the tiny amigurumi counts too. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I go over the parts of a crochet pattern in less than a minute. So this one's pretty simple. It's the term differences between US and UK terms for crochet. I am just gonna let you screenshot this. I don't know what else to say about it. It's literally just the terminology differences. So there you go. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I show you the different parts of a crochet pattern. Pattern permissions are usually published at the beginning of a pattern that tell you what you can and cannot do with that designer's pattern. Some go a little overboard, some don't put it in there at all, but this applies to all of them whether it's in there or not. The biggest thing is as soon as it's published, whether written or filmed, it's copyrighted. You don't have to file for it, and that copyright lasts 70 years. Meaning you can't republish somebody else's pattern and claim it as your own. You can't even republish somebody else's pattern and claim it as theirs, because then you're taking away from their revenue. Crochet stitches are kind of like recipe ingredients. You can't really copyright them because there's endless combinations. That also means you can't claim crochet stitches as your own. Naming them is not a problem. You can name whatever stitch whatever you want. You just cannot say that other people can't use the stitch. And then finally, designers can't tell you what you can and cannot do with the finished project. If you want to sell it, sell it. They can't do anything about it. Like and follow for more. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I go over the different parts of a crochet pattern for you. I know I'm probably going to get hate for this, but in my last video, I said that you can sell whatever you make and a designer cannot tell you that you can't sell your finished project. But this does not apply to trademarks. Trademarks are owned by the company. You cannot sell trademarked characters unless you have a license. And just because you do not know the law does not mean that you can get away with breaking the law. Meaning that if these companies want to come after you for selling trademarked items, you don't really have a leg to stand on. And I know everybody says that everybody else is doing it, so why should they come after little boo me? Somebody's always got to be the example, and I'd rather it not be me, but that's just me. And these companies do have a whole task force designated to figuring out who's making money off of their designs. I'm just giving you a heads up. To How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I show you the different parts of a crochet pattern in less than a minute. So this part is just a master list of all the crochet abbreviations. I figured I could just show you, and then you can let me know if you have any questions about them. If you hear kids in the background, it's because we're at the playground right now, and I'm taking a break from studying. And yes, I use an empty playground as a babysitter. But yeah, if you have any questions about these abbreviations, you can leave them in the comments and I'll get back to them. If I can't answer them in words, I'll just answer them with a video, like always. But like and follow for more. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I show you the parts of a crochet pattern in less than a minute. Okay, so the stitch guide is usually included right there next to the abbreviations or with the abbreviations, and it's everything past beginner level stuff. So most designers assume that you already know all of the beginner level stitches and procedures, but everything beyond that is going to be included in the stitch guide. I'm talking about stitches like puff stitches or popcorn stitches or jasmine stitches or sedge stitch. If they use some kind of a terminology, that'll be explained in the stitch guide. And if they came up with their own stitch combination and gave it a special name, that'll also be explained in the stitch guide. Be sure to like and follow for more. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I show you the different parts of a crochet pattern in a minute or less. So for the materials, you pretty much always need a crochet hook, yarn, scissors, and a yarn needle. The list on the bottom there is not all inclusive. It's just the most common ones that I've come across that are beyond the basic materials. My tip before buying a pattern or when you're shopping around for patterns is to look at the list of materials and see what you already have and let that kind of guide you in your decision-making process, because it'll also be an indicator of how difficult the pattern is going to be. So if you have a lot of extra materials like blocking pins and whatnot, I don't know, there's so many things out there, it might be an indicator that the pattern is a little bit more difficult, and if you're unfamiliar with it, you can look up how to use those things. The next couple of videos in the series is going to go into detail about the different materials, so be sure to like and follow. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I show you the different parts of a crochet pattern in less than a minute. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm just going to share the different hook sizes with the millimeter range and the US size range. Millimeters are usually used by Canada and UK terms and European terms, And then of course you have the US size range, because in the US everything has to be different. But if you see in the millimeter range, everything is in numerical order, usually by 0.25 millimeters up until you get to 4 millimeters, and then it'll go to 0.5 millimeter at a time. And in the US size range, everything is in alphabetical order, where the earlier the letter in the alphabet, the smaller the hook. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Next, we're going to talk about yarn, so be sure to like and follow. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I go over the different parts of a crochet pattern so that you can read them yourself. Next, we're going to talk about yarn weights. So this one's pretty self-explanatory on the surface. We all know the numbers, but sometimes they use there's common names for them that are used in patterns where the numbers may not be as widely used. So the next time you come across a pattern and it says any worsted weight yarn instead of 4 medium weight yarn, you know that you have to go look for the number 4 at the store. Feel free to screenshot this, and if you have any other questions about yarn, I'll be happy to answer them, but I think this is pretty much all you need to be able to read a pattern. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I show you the different parts of a crochet pattern so that you can do it yourself. So here we're going to talk about size charts. They're fairly self-explanatory. It's usually a chart or a table that tells you what sizes are available in the pattern, how to make adjustments for different sizes, yada yada yada. But I think a common question a lot of people have when it comes to size charts is, how much yarn am I actually going to need? So you can actually Google how much yarn do I need, and it'll tell you in this pretty little table. That's where I got this info from. In this video, I'm just gonna do the most common yarns, which is I think a 3 and a 4. So here's the 4. You can look at the yarn label and see how many yards are in a ball of yarn, and then buy according to what you need it for. And then if you have left over, of course, you can always return it, but at least this way you have an idea of how much you need to buy. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I go over the different parts of a crochet pattern so that you can do it yourself. This time we're talking about gauge. So gauge is the size of your stitches. So it's in a pattern so that you have an opportunity to match the size of your stitches to the size of the designer stitches. You do that by making a swatch that's at least 4 inches or 10 centimeters. I would go a little bit bigger than that. And then you count how many stitches make up 4 inches or 10 centimeters, how many rows make up 4 inches or 10 centimeters, and if your number is higher than what's in the pattern, you go up a hook size, because that means your stitches are smaller, and if your number is lower, you go down a hook size, because that means your stitches are too big. I have a video on this already. I can tag you in it. Just let me know in the comments. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I go over the different parts of a crochet pattern so that you can do it yourself. This time we're talking about pattern notes. Pattern notes are used to clarify instructions, explain common mishaps and troubleshoot them, and just to kind of save time or words inside of the pattern. Sometimes if there are abbreviations that are not common, they can be included in here as well. Just to give you an idea of what they sound like, so like a turning chain counts as a stitch. This is so that your stitch count adds up after every single row. It can be work in a continuous spiral using a stitch marker to mark the beginning of the round. That way you don't turn your work after every round, or they can tell you to turn your work after every round. They can also say to slip stitch into the first stitch and then chain 1. It can be just about anything. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I go over the different parts of a crochet pattern so that you can do it yourself. So it's hard to explain the instructions for all the patterns because there's so many variations, but tips for every pattern are to read them out loud, read the instructions out loud, and then use the abbreviations cheat sheet that I had in an earlier video. You can Google that cheat sheet. You can also type in the abbreviation itself, and Google will tell you what that word means. But I also included an example. This is for the moss stitch if you were to write it out as a pattern. So you start with chain 16, then single crochet into the second chain from the hook, chain 1, skip 1 chain, single crochet into the next. You repeat what's in between the asterisks until the end of the row, and then you chain 1 and turn. Just take it one stitch at a time. It's a lot less complicated when you actually give it a try. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I go over the different parts of a crochet pattern so that you can read them yourself. This time we're talking about crochet diagrams. I've got a series coming up on the symbols, so we're just going to go over how to read them. So we're going to start here at the slip knot, and then we're going to work our way across. This is the beginning chain, and then we're going to work single crochet. So a single crochet is a plus, and wherever the bottom of the plus is pointing at, that's where you're going to insert your hook. There's 2 chains in between those 2 single crochets, then we skip 2, work our way across, half double crochet, and then a turning chain 3, and then we have 3 double crochet pointing into this chain space. We're going to repeat that all the way across, and then we have this double crochet pointing into that turning chain, that top right there. Have another turning chain up here, and then again we're looking at where the bottom of the symbol is pointing, and that's where we're going to insert our hook, and we're just going in the snake-like form. Yeah. If you have questions, welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I go over the different parts of a crochet pattern so that you can learn how to read it yourself. The care instructions usually aren't included in a crochet pattern, but I do think that they're important to keep in mind. Now you can always refer to the yarn label, and if your yarn doesn't come with a label, hand wash and laying it flat to dry are always the safest. I personally will not make something if I have to hand wash it. So most of my stuff, all of my stuff goes into the machine with cold water. And I actually prefer to put my acrylic blankets into the dryer because it always makes them softer and then they smell good. And I like to have a soft, snuggly blanket on the couch. But it does mat the fibers together over time, so it decreases the longevity of my blankets. But I prefer to have a loved blanket versus one that just sits on the shelf because I'm afraid to clean it. Welcome back to How to Read a Crochet Pattern, where I go over the different parts of a crochet pattern so that you can learn how to read them yourself. I already made a video about blocking, and I'll tag it in this one, but it is used to shape pieces to specific dimensions, smooth stitch irregularities, flatten and curling edges, and you most likely are going to use it if you're making garments or anything that's going to be on a body where the size really matters. I also like to block my granny squares before I attach them in a big blanket. It's by no means a necessary step, but it does take it to the next level if you want to have a more professional finish. Welcome back to How to Read a Pattern, where I go over the different parts of a crochet pattern so that you can learn how to read them yourself. So this time we're talking about adjusting a pattern. That's if you want to change the size from a small to a large, or from a large to a small. That applies to blankets, garments, pillows, whatever. So here's how it's going to go. You're going to use the yarn that you want to use for the final project. Then you're going to use the stitch pattern that's in the pattern, and you're going to make a gauge swatch and make sure that your gauge matches that of the designer. Then you take the length that you want and you divide it by the length that's given in the pattern. Then you take that number and you multiply it by the number of stitches in the foundation row. You don't want to use the number of chains because the chains account for the turning chain, and you don't want to add that to your stitch count. You can do the same thing for garments. It's going to be a little bit more difficult, especially if you're doing anything with sleeves, but the concept is the same. Let me know in the comments if you need to see it in order to understand it better, but that's how it goes.